again to look into our the topics, the subject matter for our second class together. We're going to continue in a basic introduction to ethics, and I'm going to try to pack in as much as we have here into the very little time that I have to put on a video. So it'll go faster on the video than it probably does in class, but you can rewind and go back and replay some of the things that I say if I say them too fast or something like that. So anyway, this is continuing in our introduction to ethics. Today we're going to begin by looking at issues related to ethics, things that all of these different ethical theories that we'll be looking at, some of the common areas that they seek to address, some of the questions that they seek to answer, and so forth. So some of the issues related to ethics, one of the first ones is this issue of what is the good. Now notice the indefinite article, or the definite article there, the good, as in there is a good, there's the good, and then there's good. Good is an adjective that modifies things, that I have a good piece of pizza, or it was a good dog, or it was a good day. We're talking about the good, the essence, if you will, of what constitutes good. And the good can be approached many, many different ways when we're talking in terms of ethics and morals. The good can be thought of in many different ways. The first, one distinction that is usually made is the distinction between intrinsic good and instrumental good. Because some things are intrinsically good. Some things are intrinsically good, which means that they are good in and of themselves. They have value in themselves. They don't depend on, they're not valuable as a means to an end, which that's what instrumental good is. Instrumental good means that a thing or something is that is good or has value as a means to an end. To give you an example of this, one time I was out, we were clearing out some of the woods behind our house, clearing out some of the underbrush, because we were wanting to play paintball back there, actually. And so my girls and I were out there just cutting down little bushes and things like that and taking them across. Well, as I was doing that, I was carrying some brush from one place to another along a path. And what I didn't know at that time was that at some point in history, there had been a barbed wire fence that had run through the middle of this woods. It used to be a cattle farm on one side or whatnot, and then they changed it into a tree farm and grew trees there, and that's why the woods were there. Anyway, as I'm walking along this path with this big bunch of brush in my hand, I'm walking, and the tip of my boot picks up the barbed wire, gets hooked on the barbed wire fence, or the barbed wire part of the barbed wire fence. And as I step up, it brings that barbed wire up behind my calf, and as I step down, it just rips down the back of my calf, and not pleasant. It was not fun at all. And especially my daughters are freaking out because Dad's bleeding, and I'm like, okay, well, let's go get this cleaned up. So I go and get it cleaned up, and when I come in the house and I'm doing that, my wife's looking at me, and my wife is a nurse, right? And she looks at me, looks at the cut, and says, hey, when was the last time you had a tetanus shot? Like, I don't know, like high school or something, and 20 years ago. She says, I think you better go get a tetanus shot. So I'm not a big fan of needles. I don't particularly like stabbing myself with pieces of metal. But anyway, at her request, I went ahead and went to get my tetanus shot. So I went down to CVS and I paid the $50 or whatever it was that they charged, and they came and stabbed me in the arm with this piece of metal, injected the stuff in me, and so I leave, and they put a little Band-Aid on it. I'm like, I don't even get a cookie, but anyway, so I leave, and over the course of the next couple of days, like the shot where they gave me the shot just kind of swelled up and it got really painful, and it was just really annoying. Especially we went rock climbing shortly thereafter, and as my shoulder just felt like I had worked out, and it was sore, and I could barely move it, and made rock climbing very difficult. But anyway, all of that to say this: look, I don't enjoy shots, and I don't enjoy stabbing myself with pieces of metal or getting stuff injected inside of me that causes a reaction that is painful. I wouldn't call that good, okay? It wouldn't be a pleasant experience, but it was good as a means to an end. You see, I would rather have this stab in the arm than tetanus. If you look at tetanus and what it does lots of bad stuff to you. So I would rather have that. So even while I would not consider having the shot very good, it was instrumentally good. It was good as a means to an end. It was good to protect something that did have intrinsic good, or intrinsic value, and that was my health, right? Because who wants to be unhealthy? Nobody. Don't sign me up for that. So that's what the intrinsic good in that situation was my health. The instrumental good was the tetanus shot, which was not pleasant for sure. Well, moving right along, the next thing in the area of the good that we can talk about is the summum bonum, or the greatest good. The greatest good. And all ethical systems assume a greatest good, or a summum bonum. The summum bonum is the goal toward which the ethical system, the ultimate ethical principle that they set up. For example, in utilitarianism, the principle of utility says that one should always promote whatever action results in the greatest good for the greatest number. And that's the principle of utility, right? And so you ask, okay, well, is lying wrong? Well, it may be, maybe it's not, based on what brings the greatest good for the greatest number in utilitarianism. That would be the greatest good according to that particular ethical system. But every ethical system has a greatest good. Not all of them are always obvious, but they all have them. So that's the good. The next thing in the issue of ethics is that the next issue that we have in ethics, that every one of these theories will try to deal with or try to in some way exhibit is about how to evaluate actions. How to evaluate actions. And they would say, for example, is the act good because the act is what God requires? So good and bad are simply related to what God requires. Oops. Maybe. Hold on just a second. All right, not sure what happened there, but anyway, is the act good simply because it's what God requires? Is the act good because of the consequences that it produces? And so when an act produces good consequences, it's good. When an act produces bad consequences, it's bad. Should we evaluate the act by this criteria? Is an act good simply because the act itself is intrinsically good? So for example, it's never right to lie, they might say. But maybe there are some exceptions to that. I don't know. But this view would say no, the goodness is simply related to the act itself. Or is the act good because the motive behind the act was noble? You've heard of we believe that motive plays a part, right? Because if a person steals a loaf of bread to feed their family, we're gonna hold that to a lesser degree than somebody who steals just to vandalize something or something like that. We're gonna notice that the motive there sort of informs us on the weight of their guilt. To some degree, it's almost natural to think that way. Or is the act good because it's the kind of act that a good person or a virtuous person would do? This is the view of virtue ethics, that really we need to focus more on a person's character than we need to focus on the act itself, the individual act itself. All right, and now I believe this is the final thing I want to talk about in terms of issues in ethics, and that is subjective versus objective. And this is an important concept to grasp, because one of the first questions that we'll ask ourselves in relationship to ethics is there any such thing as a universal ethical principle, something outside of ourselves that would inform us or command us on how we should act and how we should behave? Subjective essentially has to do with something that exists only within the mind of human beings. Now, when we say within the mind of human beings, it could be an individual human being and their subjective opinion about what's right and wrong, or it could be a cultural opinion within the mind of the entire culture around us, and that opinion saying what is right or wrong. But subjective has to do with with morality that exists only within the mind of humans, whether individually or in groups, and we'll see that as we work through this. But understand, that's what subjective means. Now, objective means this, as it relates to ethics. Objective has to do with that which is true in the outside world. the world outside of us, the world around us, the world that doesn't depend on our opinion or on our understanding, a world that is independent of your mental action and my mental action. Is there a standard of morality that exists outside of human opinion that would sort of behold everyone to it? That's the question of objective ethics. Now, some examples of objective things, objectivity, are external objects. As I'm looking across this room, I know you can't see it on the videotape, but as I'm looking across this room, I see desks, and I see tables, and I see chairs. All of those things exist in the world outside of me, the external world, right, outside of my mind. They don't depend on my being able to see them or know that they are there in order for them to exist. And so we would call that objective, things that exist outside of our mind. That's subjective versus objective. Okay, well, that's it for issues in ethics that we'll look at. The next one we'll look at, the next video that we'll look at is an answer to the question, or an attempt to address the question, why should we be moral? Okay? Alrighty, thank you very much.